Yas Island. Lights everywhere. Two fighters walk out. The whole thing broadcast to millions of people across the world, and it looks like the future of the sport. But stop for a second and ask the question nobody in that broadcast booth is asking. How does a country with one of the worst human rights records on the planet become the second home of the world's most watched combat sport? Because this wasn't a pandemic solution. It wasn't a lucky opportunity. It was the finish line of a play that started 10 years before any of us heard the words Fight Island. And the UFC isn't the first sport the UAE bought to pull this off. This is how the UAE took over the UFC. Back in 2010, something happened that barely made the sport's news cycle. A company called Flash Entertainment quietly acquired a 10% stake in the UFC. No press conference, no big announcement. Most fans had no idea it even happened. Flash Entertainment wasn't some private equity firm looking for a return. It was a state-backed entertainment vehicle tied directly to the Abu Dhabi government and its leadership. When Flash Entertainment buys into something, Abu Dhabi buys into something. That's not a technicality. That's the whole point. To understand why they wanted the UFC specifically, you have to understand what the UAE was dealing with at the time. Oil wealth was never going to be enough on its own. International scrutiny over labor conditions, migrant worker abuse, and political repression was growing. The government needed a different story told about them on the global stage, and they needed it told by someone with a massive audience. MMA was perfect for this. The sport was growing faster than almost anything else in the entertainment world. Its audience skewed young, male, and global. And critically, it wasn't the kind of fan base that typically sat around asking geopolitical questions about the venue. They wanted to watch fights. The UFC gave the UAE access to exactly the crowd they needed to reach. This is what sportswashing actually is, stripped of the jargon. You don't buy a sport because you expect a financial return. You buy it because the association changes how people feel about you. Every time a fighter walks out in Abu Dhabi, every time a commentator says, "What an atmosphere here tonight," every time a fan tweets about how electric the crowd was, that's the product, not the fight, the feeling. The 10% stake was the opening move, a quiet foot in the door. Yas Island didn't happen by accident. It's a purpose-built entertainment destination, pulled out of the water and constructed from scratch to project a specific image of the UAE to the rest of the world. Modern, exciting, open. The kind of place you'd want to visit, watch a race, watch a fight, post about on social media. That was the design brief, and the first major tenant was Formula One. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix launched on Yas Island in 2009, 1 year before the UFC stake. Think about that sequence. They built the island, they locked in one of the most watched annual sporting events on the planet, and then they went shopping for more. F1, golf, boxing, tennis, Formula E. The UAE doesn't test the water, it buys the whole ecosystem. So when 2020 arrived and the UFC needed somewhere to run cards during the pandemic, Yas Island was ready. Dana White called it a solution, and technically it was. But the infrastructure existed because it was always going to be the destination. COVID didn't create Fight Island. COVID just gave them the PR moment they'd been building toward for a decade. Now here's the part that doesn't make the broadcast. The workers who built Yas Island, who poured the concrete, installed the seats, wired the lights in the arena where Khabib and Gaethje fought, most of them came from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, under a system called kafala. Kafala ties a migrant worker's legal status directly to their employer. You can't change jobs without your employer's permission. In many cases, you can't leave the country without their permission either. Your visa, your legal right to exist in the UAE, is entirely in someone else's hands. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented what happens inside that system. Wage theft is widespread. Workers arrive expecting one salary and get paid less, or sometimes nothing, for months. Passport confiscation is common. Employers physically holding workers' travel documents so they can't leave. And then there's the heat. Construction workers in the UAE have died working in temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius with no enforceable protections. When they die, there's often no recourse for their families. These are the people who built the venue, and while all of that was happening, Dana White was on a jet ski posting Instagram stories about how unbelievable Abu Dhabi is. That's not a coincidence. That's the machine working. The fighters called it paradise. The production value was real. The pay was real. The crowd energy was real. And for the billions of people watching at home, Abu Dhabi looked like a place that loved combat sports and knew how to put on a show. The UAE got exactly what it paid for, a global broadcast full of people saying great things about them on camera, while the workers who made those broadcasts physically possible existed in a legal gray zone a few miles down the road. The contrast isn't incidental to the story. It is the story.
The playbook is simple. Buy into something big, absorb the criticism, and wait until the association feels normal. It always does. The fighters who fight in Abu Dhabi get paid well, the production value is real, and the cameras never pan to the labor camps. That's not an accident. The workers who built that arena still can't unionize, still can't easily change employers, and have no path to citizenship, no matter how many years they've spent building the country. They're not in the highlight reel. They're just the reason it exists. The UAE didn't buy the UFC to make money. It bought the story the UFC tells about it. Every walkout, every roaring crowd, every commentator calling Yas Island electric. That's the return on investment. And that story is worth more than any money they will ever make because it casts a shadow over every crime the UAE commits. Forever.